If you play with any of these Spanish coming up in this game, you was getting handed to you.
All the way in Rome, I can still smell it. Out of my coast, we can still smell it.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Hope you had a wonderful weekend. Back with you, the Brooklyn City FC Monday Kickoff. Man, still recovering, I think, from yesterday. It's exhausting World Cup final, exhausting to watch emotionally. And that was after recovering from the goal fest and the third place game, which was really entertaining and fantastic. So not a lot of stuff on the Brooklyn City side to go over, but why not have a recap in the kickoff show to talk about the World Cup in a little bit. And you probably see, if you're on social media at all, a lot of this chatter is now starting to go on about, like, what do we need to fix with U.S. soccer because of the men's, like how are we going to somehow fix U.S. soccer so that we can get further in the World Cup? So I'll touch on that a little bit too, because I think there's some points that are worth bringing up. So quickly on the Brooklyn City FC side, so we had that crazy sequence of weather from the smoke that descended upon New York City on Thursday night and Friday and lingered into Saturday, followed by the crazy thunderstorms and rain on Saturday. Completely wiped out any chance for our last WPSL 2 match happening. So our women's WPSL 2 team was supposed to play a game, our last home game and the last game of the season on Saturday at Brooklyn College. And we had to cancel, originally canceled because of the air quality, just hadn't gotten back to a healthy level. But then, oddly enough, it kind of worked out with those crazy midday thunderstorms. So anyway, game didn't happen. Very unlikely that it's going to get rescheduled due to both teams' availability and whatnot. So it's kind of an unfortunate way for the WPSL 2 season to end, because it really was a good summer for us on the women's side with both our first and second teams in the WPSL. Great, both on the results side, just the strength of the player pool, the quality that we put out, and whatnot. So too bad for it to end this way, but we'll already be looking forward to next summer and continue to grow our women's semi-pro side of the club and see what we can achieve in 2027. So now to get into the World Cup. Wow. Super interesting, so many subplots, so many things that, again, with social media, these various narratives that are kind of running like wildfire, no pun intended. But what a game on Sunday. Yes, total domination by Spain. There's no question about that. Argentina was up against a tough task. This is a more dominant Spain team that I think a lot of people realize. But when you go back and look at the fact they've only conceded one goal, not only just dominate possession, which is, of course, everybody's favorite thing to hate, possession for possession, but when you don't have the ball, as Thierry Henry was repeatedly pointing out on the broadcast, so if you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe him. When you don't have the ball, you can't score. So just an incredible performance for the entire tournament by Spain. And Argentina, a ton of credit for just the fight and competitiveness and, grittiness, if you want to call that, but finding ways to win up until that point. But they just didn't have what it was going to take. But still, and I think this is getting a little bit lost in the kind of narrative of the various narratives about the game and both teams and the countries and whatnot. But I hope everyone realizes that Argentina was a few feet away from tying that match before the end of extra time. It was kind of funny to see Spain retreat into, I guess you want to call it a low block or just like a defensive mentality, which you kind of understand. We're trying to finish out the game, but to me, it almost felt like they were on the verge of making the same mistake that England did, and just essentially conceded possession to Argentina, who then created chance after chance and really blew one or two golden chances to score a goal. Despite how bad they were for the rest of the game, they almost scored a goal in the final 5 minutes. And you can only imagine if that match ended up going to penalties and the chances of Argentina pulling a result out of nothing in a World Cup final. So a little bit of relief just from the sense of, making the better team winning the match and winning the tournament. So again, congrats to Spain. It's kind of scary to think about what's possible with this country and their national teams for the years ahead to come on both the men's and women's side. Just domination and just such a clear, rock solid football culture and way of playing that they have across their entire country. So congrats to them. And again, credit to Argentina to making it to the final, which felt with like kind of a limited roster, but they were able to do it. And of course, the big question is what's going to happen with Leo Messi. Unfortunate for him to have that type of final, but he really wasn't getting much, didn't have much to work with, I guess you could say. And he, at the end of the day, to score, I forget how many goals he had in the tournament at his age is pretty remarkable. So let's see if it seems unlikely that he will make another World Cup appearance, but let's not forget that he actually retired from international football in, was it 2016? So anything's possible. And if he decides to stay on for the next Copa America, I would say the chances of him trying to stay on for the World Cup would go up if they have a decent squad. So we shall see. And then, of course, the third place game. What a just crazy game from the start to the end. If you want to, as the English media is trying to pull on that to support narratives about the semifinal loss, which is just ludicrous. Because the third place game, yes, they were playing football. It wasn't played under the same competitive level of intensity. But man, it was so entertaining to see that with all the goals scored, with the creativity that kind of came out once the pressure was off. And just a really fun event to watch. So I hope everybody got to see that. I think England went up 4-0 in the first half. France stormed back to 4-3. And then finished 6-4, of course. And some interesting subplots in that game as well, with Jude Bellingham handing over a penalty opportunity to Saka for him to be able to get the hat trick in the tournament, and then Jude pulling out a kind of not a miracle goal, but a crazy individual performance to get his last goal of the tournament. Kind of dribbling the whole field, dribbling horizontally across the box to finish in a spectacular way. So congrats to him. He's definitely somebody who stood out in this tournament and really asserted himself as one of the top players in the world. All right, so for the final segment, I do want to touch on this kind of narrative that I guess started when the U.S. men's national team was bounced from the tournament, but it's kind of continued and like now it's taking a turn into the whole pay-to-play boogeyman, like I'd like to call it, as far as something to point to as like what's getting in the way, what's the one thing we can change or that's we can point to that's getting in the way, that's a roadblock to our progress, which unfortunately segues really into the first discussion we need to have if we're truly going to understand this, which is culture. Culture is behind everything when it comes to sporting development on a grand scale. You can look at it for the original American sports of baseball, basketball, American football, but you got to look at it. You got to understand worldwide football culture. And there isn't one culture worldwide, but you got to understand what it means and what it is in other countries. And you can start with the countries that were in the World Cup final. Argentina, of course, for all the things that are getting under our skin about whether the antics and behavior on the field, their approach to competing, which is just fundamentally different. Even some of the stuff with the fans, supporters. At the end of the day, the football culture is on a completely different level, and this is why they're in multiple World Cup finals, why they're constantly competing at the top level. It's not because of some national curriculum that they have. It's just not. It's not because of the economic structure. Although the business models at the youth side does eventually reflect the culture that we have and that they have. But it's when kids are obsessed with whatever it is, whether it's the sport, whether it's an art form, or whatever it is, part of that in that country's culture, that is what's going to drive their development. It's that obsession, it's that living and breathing it from the earliest ages and just continuing to be obsessed and continuing to have that feeling inside that they're going to have to compete and get better and just on their own, push themselves to get to whatever level they're trying to get to. That is what drives the development. You could say the same on Spain. Now, obviously, there's the whole technical side, sporting side with Spain, which is also culture driven, because the culture is what allows them nationally to buy into everything on the sporting side. And without that, it really wouldn't happen anyway. But again, the culture is what drives their commitment to playing in a certain style, which starts at the earliest ages, how they think about the game. And that just nothing ever gets into the way of that as they progress, let's say from grassroots soccer into club soccer into youth national structures and so forth. It's that commitment, that belief, and there's just that understanding that they have. So that is a monumental hurdle for us to get over. I think why you see in other sports, because it's been that kind of organic obsession from kids from all backgrounds and levels, and that's what's fueled their development, and that's why we have more world-class players in some of the other sports. But in soccer, it's just very identity driven. It's really the prevailing culture on the youth side. And it's not that there hasn't been kind of like a grassroots level where kids are learning the game. Now, we haven't had the kind of population-wide, like generational understanding of the game. But eventually, we'll get over that hump. But even if you think of like the identity of the game as you progress like out of grassroots, what was it called? It's been called travel soccer for some reason. For some God-forsaken reason, that's the term that was come up with. So it's created an identity of, as you get better, of about like the amount of traveling that you're doing is somehow identifying the fact that is what we're using to identify the fact that you're a better player. So it's just from the inception, it's just gone off track. And it's just continued to progress. So, and even that whole, right, it's never really been called club soccer. I mean, maybe it's starting to now, but it's just been about like travel teams. So again, it's just so bizarre. But you see that persists, like even, at the more older levels of youth and elite levels, which the whole word is also potentially part of the problem. But it's like how much traveling are you doing? It's like there's a certain status associated with like, going to showcase tournaments, to flying across the country for competition, because that somehow gives you the identity as a better player. And it's just really insane, and it's unfortunate. And that now married with the business side, so there's obviously becomes a business opportunity to attach to that type of culture, right? Because there's a huge marketing component. And that's just, it's unfortunately, because there was no other culture in place to kind of keep everything grounded, it's just like spiraled and exploded into a huge, like multi-billion-dollar business here with the youth soccer. And you actually even see it in other sports. There's a lot of people in basketball, you hear about older generation of pro athletes talking about the AAU basketball and the travel and the expense, and it's just kind of like gone off track. So yeah, it's going to be really difficult to get over that. And then the other piece of it is just the economic structure that we have in American sports, which works for the sports that are predominantly American, but in a worldwide marketplace, the kind of monopoly controlled, the monopolistic business model is just not, it's just going to get in the way of us being able to compete. on the soccer side, because again, it becomes about gateways, on financial access, and then there's just the incentives just aren't in place to invest and compete at the younger levels, because unless you've bought into access at the pro level, it's not going to really matter. So that's where we're at. Could do entire multiple episodes on this topic. We'll kind of leave it alone from there. But looking ahead for the rest of the year, for the rest of the summer, we've got youth summer camps, and then we'll be in preseason in the month of August, and away we go for the 2026-27 year. Hard to believe. Both the men's and women's sides, with our amateur team starting up in August, September, and then our semi-pro teams kicking in next spring and summer of 2027. So a lot to look forward to. I will be previewing all of it in upcoming episodes. Till then, have a great summer, and we will see you soon. Take care.